After 40 years on this bench, I thought I'd seen every kind of person walk through those courtroom doors. The angry ones, the scared ones, the defiant ones, and the broken ones. But one Tuesday morning last spring, a man walked into my courtroom who reminded me exactly why I became a judge in the first place. He didn't speak much English. His hands were rough from years of hard labor. And when he looked at me, I saw something in his eyes that took me right back to my own father's journey to this country. What happened that morning, what I witnessed in that man's face when he thought he'd lose everything, it shook me to my core. And when I finally made my decision, when I told him what I was going to do, I watched a grown man break down and cry right there in front of everyone. Let me tell you exactly what happened, because this is a story about dignity, sacrifice, and what it really means to serve justice with compassion. But before I tell you this whole story, do me a favor, hit that subscribe button and drop a comment telling me where you're watching from, because what I'm about to share with you is something that needs to be heard. Trust me, you won't want to miss a single word of this. I've been a municipal court judge in Providence, Rhode Island for 40 years now. 40 years. Sometimes I can't believe it myself. Every morning I wake up at 5:30. I make my coffee the way my father taught me, strong and black, none of that fancy cream and sugar nonsense. I kiss my wife Joyce goodbye. She's usually still half asleep, and I drive the same route to the courthouse that I've driven since 1985. I know every pothole, every traffic light, every corner store along the way. My father came to this country from Italy with nothing, absolutely nothing. He didn't speak English. He had $2 in his pocket and a willingness to work harder than anyone else. I grew up watching him leave before sunrise and come home after dark, his hands calloused and worn, but his spirit never broken. He taught me something that I've carried with me every single day of my life. He said, "Francesco, in America, you judge a man by his character, not by his bank account. You show respect to everyone, from the street sweeper to the mayor, because we're all equal under God." Those words have guided every decision I've made in my courtroom. People ask me why I'm still doing this at my age. My friends are retired, playing golf, traveling the world. But I can't imagine not putting on these robes every morning. I can't imagine not walking into that courtroom and having the chance to make a difference in someone's life. Because that's what this job is really about. It's not about the gavel or the authority or the title. It's about seeing people, really seeing them at the worst moments of their lives and finding a way to show them that the system isn't just about punishment. Sometimes it's about understanding. Sometimes it's about mercy. That particular Tuesday morning started like any other. I got to the courthouse at 8:15 sharp. My clerk, Christina, she's been with me for almost 20 years now. She had my coffee waiting on my desk exactly the way I like it. She knows me better than I know myself sometimes. I remember she looked at me that morning and said, "Judge, we've got a full docket today, 23 cases." I nodded, took a sip of my coffee, and started going through the files. I always read every file before court starts, every single one. I don't care if it's a parking ticket or a more serious violation. Every person who comes before me deserves to know that I've taken the time to understand their situation before they even walk through that door. It's a habit my mentor taught me when I first became a judge. He said, "Frank, the moment you stop caring about the details is the moment you stop being a good judge." I've never forgotten that. As I was going through the files that morning, one case caught my attention. Traffic violations, multiple parking tickets. The name was Carlos Mendez. The address was in one of the older neighborhoods in Providence, the kind of neighborhood where families live paycheck to paycheck, where people work 2 or 3 jobs just to keep the lights on. I saw that there were notes in the file indicating that Mr. Menendez had missed 2 previous court dates. That's usually not a good sign. When people miss court dates, it often means they're avoiding the situation, hoping it'll just go away. But problems don't go away. They just get bigger. I noticed something else in the file. There was a note from our office staff saying that Mr. Menendez had called several times trying to explain something, but there had been a language barrier. He primarily spoke Spanish. That detail hit me hard. I thought about my father again, how he must have felt in those early years in America, trying to communicate, trying to be understood, and running into walls everywhere he turned. At 9 o'clock, I walked into the courtroom. I always take a moment before I sit down to look around the room. I see the faces of the people waiting for their cases to be called. Some are nervous, fidgeting with their hands. Some are trying to look confident, but I can see right through it. Some are resigned, like they've already accepted whatever punishment is coming. And some look absolutely terrified. That morning, the courtroom was packed, standing room only. I saw mothers with young children, trying to keep them quiet. I saw elderly folks who probably took the bus to get here. I saw young people in their work uniforms, clearly worried about missing their shifts. And in the back corner, I saw a man who I would soon learn was Carlos Mendez. He was wearing worn work clothes, heavy boots with concrete dust on them. His hands, even from where I sat, looked rough and weathered. He was sitting very still, very upright, with a dignity that you can't fake. Next to him was a younger woman, maybe late 20s, who I assumed was his daughter. She kept leaning over to whisper to him, and I could tell she was translating, helping him understand what was happening around him. I started calling cases. The first few were routine, parking violations, a broken taillight, an expired registration. I try to be fair but firm. If someone has a legitimate reason, if they show me respect and honesty, I'll work with them. But if someone comes in with attitude, if they lie to me or show disrespect to my courtroom, that's a different story. Around mid-morning, I called a case for a young woman named Jessica. She was there for multiple parking tickets outside her apartment. When I asked her about it, she started crying. She told me she was a single mother working as a nurse at Rhode Island Hospital, pulling double shifts to make ends meet. She said the parking in her neighborhood was impossible, and sometimes she had no choice but to park in zones where she'd get ticketed because she was so exhausted from her shift that she couldn't walk the extra blocks from legal parking. I listened to her, really listened. I saw the exhaustion in her eyes. I saw the hospital ID still clipped to her shirt. I thought about how nurses had worked themselves to the bone during the pandemic, risking their own health to take care of others. I looked at her fines, about $300 total. I could see in her face that $300 might as well have been $3,000. It was money she didn't have. I said to her, "Jessica, let me ask you something. Are you still working those double shifts?" She nodded, wiping her eyes. "Every week, Your Honor." I nodded slowly. "And you're taking care of your daughter by yourself?" She nodded again. "Yes, sir. She's 7 years old." I made my decision right there. I said, "Jessica, I'm going to reduce these fines to $50 total. I'm going to give you 90 days to pay it. And if you need more time, you come back and see me. But I need you to promise me something." She looked up at me, hope flickering in her eyes. "Yes, Your Honor, anything." I said, "I need you to take care of yourself, because if you don't take care of yourself, you can't take care of your daughter or your patients. That's an order from this court. Do you understand?" She broke down crying and said, "Thank you, Your Honor. Thank you so much." I watched her walk out of that courtroom like a weight had been lifted off her shoulders. That's why I do this job, for moments like that. After Jessica's case, Christina called out, "Carlos Mendez." I looked up and saw the man from the back corner stand up. His daughter stood with him, and they made their way to the front. I could see he was nervous. His hands were clasped in front of him, and he kept his eyes down in a gesture of respect. Christina handed me his file, and I reviewed it one more time while they approached. 7 parking tickets over the course of 4 months, all in the same area, near a construction site. The fines had accumulated to almost $600. With the late fees from the missed court dates, we were looking at close to $800 total. I looked at Mr. Menendez, and I saw my father. I saw every immigrant who came to this country looking for a better life. I saw the dignity in his posture, despite his nervousness. I saw a man who worked with his hands, who probably sent money back home to family, who broke his back every day to provide for the people he loved. I said, "Mr. Menendez, buenos dias." His head snapped up, and I saw surprise in his eyes. I don't speak much Spanish, but I know enough to be respectful. I grew up in a neighborhood full of immigrants, Italian, Portuguese, Spanish. You pick things up. His daughter smiled slightly, and I could see her relax just a little. I said, I understand there's a language barrier here. That's okay. Your daughter is here to help translate? The young woman nodded and said, Yes, Your Honor. I'm Maria, his daughter. I'll translate for him. I nodded and said, Maria, please tell your father that he's not in any trouble for not speaking English. This is America. We speak every language here. Tell him I just want to understand his situation so I can make a fair decision. I watched as Maria translated my words to her father in rapid Spanish. I saw his shoulders relax slightly. He nodded and said something back to her in Spanish. Maria turned to me and said, Your Honor, my father says thank you for your respect. He's very sorry he missed the court dates. He was confused about the system and afraid. I leaned forward on my bench and said, Tell him I understand. I want him to explain to me about these parking tickets. They're all in the same location. What was happening there? Maria translated, and her father began to speak. I watched his face as he talked. I didn't understand all the words, but I understood the emotion. I understood the worry. I understood the frustration. He spoke for about a minute, his hands moving as he explained, and then Maria translated for me. She said, Your Honor, my father works in construction. He's a day laborer. Every morning at 5:30, he goes to a location where contractors come to hire workers. It's near the corner of Broad Street and Elmwood Avenue. He parks there and waits, sometimes for hours, hoping to get picked for a job that day. The parking signs are confusing and he couldn't read them properly. He didn't know he was parking illegally. When he got the first ticket, he didn't understand it. He thought if he just paid it, that would be the end. But they kept coming, and the cost kept growing, and he got scared. I listened carefully. I knew the area she was describing. It's a spot where immigrant workers gather every morning hoping for construction work. I'd driven past it 1,000 times. The parking situation there is complicated, with different restrictions at different times. Even native English speakers get confused by those signs. I said, Maria, ask your father how often he gets work. Is it every day? She translated, and her father shook his head, speaking quietly. Maria said, No, Your Honor, sometimes he gets work 3 or 4 days a week, sometimes only 1 or 2. It depends on how many contractors come. On good weeks, he makes maybe $400. On bad weeks, maybe $150. I did the math in my head. On a good month, this man was making maybe $1,600. Out of that, he had rent, food, utilities, and probably obligations to family back in his home country. The $800 in fines I was looking at would devastate him. It might mean he couldn't pay rent. It might mean his family went hungry. But I also had to consider the law. He had violated parking regulations multiple times. He had missed court dates. I couldn't just dismiss everything without understanding the full picture. I needed to know more about this man's character. I said, Maria, I want to ask your father some questions, and I want you to translate exactly what I say and exactly what he says back. Can you do that? She nodded seriously. Yes, Your Honor. Now let me pause here for just a second. I need to ask you something. Have you ever been in a situation where language was a barrier, where you couldn't fully express yourself or understand what was happening to you? It's terrifying. Leave me a comment because I actually read them. And if you're enjoying this story, hit that like button for me. I looked directly at Mr. Menendez and said, Sir, how long have you been in the United States? Maria translated, and he replied. She said, 8 years, Your Honor. I asked, Do you have family here? He nodded vigorously and spoke, and Maria translated. Yes, Your Honor. I have my daughter Maria and my son Miguel. Miguel is 17 and still in high school. My wife passed away 4 years ago from cancer. That hit me hard. I felt it in my chest. This man had lost his wife, was raising 2 children in a country where he didn't speak the language fluently, and was working day labor jobs to survive. I took a breath and said, I'm very sorry for your loss. Tell your father I'm very sorry. Maria's voice cracked slightly as she translated. Her father nodded, his eyes becoming moist. He said something softly, and Maria translated. He says thank you. He says she was everything to him, and he's trying to be both mother and father to us now. I had to pause for a moment. I thought about my own wife, my own children. I thought about how hard it would be to face the world alone, to raise kids alone, especially in a place where everything is unfamiliar and difficult. I said, Maria, tell me about your brother. He's in high school? She nodded, and I could see pride come into her eyes. Yes, Your Honor. Miguel is a junior at Classical High School. He has a 3.8 GPA. He wants to be an engineer. He's already been looking at colleges. I smiled. That's wonderful. And what about you? What do you do? Maria said, I work at CVS as a pharmacy technician. I'm also taking classes at Community College of Rhode Island. I want to be a pharmacist someday. I looked at this family standing before me. A father who worked himself to exhaustion every day. A daughter who was working and going to school and helping translate for her father in court. A son who was excelling in one of the best high schools in Providence and dreaming of college. This was exactly the kind of family that made America strong. This was exactly the kind of family my father had been part of when he came here. I said, Mr. Menendez, let me ask you something else. Why didn't you come to court the first 2 times? Help me understand that. Maria translated, and her father spoke for a while, looking ashamed. Maria said, Your Honor, my father says he was afraid. He thought if he came to court and they saw he couldn't speak English well, they might find out about his status. He was terrified of being deported and leaving us alone. There it was, the real issue, fear. This man wasn't avoiding court because he was irresponsible or disrespectful. He was avoiding it because he was terrified of losing everything, of being separated from his children. I said, Maria, I need to be very clear about something. I need to know your father's immigration status. Is he here legally? She hesitated, and I saw the fear flash across both their faces. Then she said, Your Honor, he has a work permit. He's in the process of applying for his green card. It's been pending for 3 years. We have a lawyer helping us, but the system is very slow. I nodded. I knew how slow the immigration system could be. I'd seen it with countless families, people who were following the rules, doing everything right, and still waiting years and years for resolution. I said, okay, I understand. Tell your father that this court doesn't report to immigration. That's not what we do here. I'm only concerned with these parking tickets. I need him to understand that he's safe here in terms of his immigration status. Can you tell him that? I watched Maria translate, and I saw the visible relief wash over her father's face. His shoulders dropped, and he let out a breath he must have been holding for weeks. He said something to Maria, and she said, He says thank you, Your Honor. He says he's been carrying that fear like a stone in his chest. I understood that fear. I'd seen it in my father's generation, the fear of never quite belonging, of always being one mistake away from losing everything you'd built. I said, Mr. Menendez, here's my concern. You have $800 in fines and fees here. That's a lot of money. I can see from your daughter's testimony that you're a hard-working man, that you're raising good kids, that you're trying to do the right thing. But I also have a responsibility to uphold the law. You did park illegally. Multiple times. Help me understand why you kept parking there after you got the first ticket. Maria translated, and her father spoke earnestly, gesturing toward his boots, his work clothes. Maria said, Your Honor, he says he knew after the first ticket that he was doing something wrong, but he didn't know where else to park. If he didn't get to that corner early, by 5:30 or 6 o'clock, he wouldn't get picked for work. If he had to park far away and walk, by the time he got there, all the jobs would be taken. He needed the work. We needed the money. He made a choice to risk the tickets because without work, we couldn't pay rent or buy food. He's very sorry. He knows it was wrong. I sat back in my chair and really thought about this. Here was a man caught between impossible choices. Park illegally and risk tickets, or park legally and risk not being able to feed his family. What would I have done in his situation? What would my father have done? I looked at Mr. Menendez and said, "Sir, I want to ask you something, and I want you to be completely honest with me. If I reduce these fines, if I give you a chance here today, will you find a way to park legally? Will you figure out a solution so you're not back in front of me in 6 months?" Maria translated, and her father spoke immediately and firmly. She said, "He says yes, Your Honor. Absolutely yes. He says he's already talked to his neighbor who lives closer to that corner, and the neighbor said he can park in his driveway for $20 a month. He just didn't have the money to pay for the parking before because he was trying to pay these tickets." I nodded slowly. I was starting to see the full picture now. This man had been trapped in a cycle. He couldn't afford legal parking, so he parked illegally. He got tickets, which took money away from being able to afford legal parking. Then he got more tickets, and the cycle continued. I said, "Christina, what's the minimum fine I can impose for these violations?" Christina, bless her heart, she knows the law inside and out. She checked her computer and said, "Judge, given the multiple violations and the missed court dates, the minimum fine would be $400. $400, still a massive amount for this man. I thought about it. I thought about justice, about mercy, about what my father would want me to do. I thought about those 2 kids. One in high school, dreaming of being an engineer. One working and going to college, dreaming of being a pharmacist. I thought about what would happen to them if I crushed their father with a fine he couldn't pay. But I also thought about precedent. I thought about fairness. I thought about all the other people who came before me who also struggled to pay their fines. I couldn't just let everyone off the hook. There had to be accountability. Then I had an idea. I said, "Mr. Menendez, I'm going to make you an offer. I'm going to reduce your fines to $200. I saw Maria's eyes widen as she translated. Her father's face showed relief, but I wasn't finished. I said, "But here's the condition. I want you to pay $50 today, right now. Can you do that?" Maria translated, and her father immediately reached into his pocket. He pulled out a worn leather wallet and opened it. I watched him count out bills, 10s, 5s, 1s. He counted out exactly $50 and handed it to his daughter. She brought it up to Christina. I said, "Good. That shows me you're serious about taking care of this. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to give you 6 months to pay the remaining $150. That's $25 a month. Can you manage that?" Maria translated, and her father nodded emphatically. "Yes, Your Honor. Yes, he can do that." I said, "But that's not all. I want something else from you." I saw confusion cross their faces. I said, "I want your son Miguel to write me a letter. I want him to write me 2 pages about what he wants to study in college and why. I want to know about his dreams. Can he do that?" Maria looked surprised. She translated, and her father looked confused at first, then emotional. He spoke to Maria, and she said, "Your Honor, he's asking why you want this." I smiled. I said, "Because I want to remind your father what he's working for. I want him to remember that every day he stands on that corner waiting for work, every time he's tired and sore and thinks about giving up, he's doing it for Miguel's future. He's doing it so his son can become an engineer. I want that letter to be a reminder of what matters. And maybe, just maybe, I'll keep that letter in my desk. And when I'm having a hard day, I'll read it and remember why I do this job." I'm going to be honest with you. At this point, I could feel my own emotions rising. If you've ever felt that connection to someone's struggle, if you've ever seen yourself or your family in someone else's story, you know what I'm talking about. Hit that like button if you're still with me. And make sure you're subscribed, because what happens next, what this father does, I'll never forget it as long as I live. Maria translated what I'd said to her father. I watched his face as he understood my words. His eyes filled with tears. He said something in Spanish, and his voice was shaking. Maria's own voice cracked as she translated. He says, "Your Honor, he doesn't have words to thank you. He says you've given him hope. He says you remind him that there are still good people in this world." Then Mr. Menendez did something I'll never forget. He stepped forward and asked, through his daughter, if he could shake my hand. Now, normally there's a protocol in court. There's a distance that's maintained. But I looked at this man, this father, this human being who was just trying to survive and give his kids a better life, and protocol didn't matter. I stepped down from my bench. I walked over to him, and I shook his hand. His hand was rough and calloused, the hand of a man who'd worked hard his entire life. His grip was firm and grateful. He said something in Spanish, and Maria translated. He says, "God bless you, Your Honor." He says he'll pray for you and your family. I said to him, through Maria, "You tell your father that he doesn't need to thank me. He needs to thank himself. He's the one who's working hard every day. He's the one who's raising good kids. He's the one who showed up here today, scared but ready to face this. That takes courage. That takes character, and I respect that more than anything." As they turned to leave, I called out, "Maria." She turned back. I said, "I meant what I said about that letter from Miguel. I really do want it. Tell him to put his heart into it. Tell him to dream big, and tell him that Judge Caprio believes in him." She nodded, tears running down her face now. "I will, Your Honor. Thank you. Thank you so much." I watched them walk out of my courtroom. Mr. Menendez had his arm around his daughter's shoulders. They were talking quietly in Spanish. I could see the relief in their body language, the weight that had been lifted. I sat back down at my bench and took a moment. Christina looked at me and smiled. She knows me. She knew I was emotional. She didn't say anything. She just handed me a tissue and called the next case. But I couldn't stop thinking about Mr. Menendez. I thought about him all through the rest of the docket that morning. I wondered if I'd made the right decision. I wondered if $200 was still too much. I wondered if I should have just dismissed the whole thing. Then I reminded myself that justice isn't about making everything perfect. It's about finding balance. Mr. Menendez had violated the law. There had to be some consequence, some acknowledgement that rules exist for a reason. But mercy meant recognizing that circumstances matter, that context matters, that sometimes people make mistakes not out of disrespect, but out of desperation. At lunch, I sat in my chambers and ate the sandwich Joyce had packed for me that morning. I thought about my father. I thought about how many times he must have faced situations where the language barrier made everything harder, where people dismissed him or looked down on him because of his accent. My father used to tell me a story. When he first came to America, he got a job at a factory. The foreman was a man who had no patience for immigrants. He'd yell at my father, mock his broken English, make him do the worst jobs. But my father never complained. He just worked harder. He showed up earlier and stayed later than anyone else. Eventually, even that foreman had to respect him because my father's work ethic was undeniable. One day, the foreman asked my father, "Why don't you learn English? Why don't you make it easier on yourself?" And my father said in his broken English, "I try. Every day I try, but I work 12 hours. When do I have time? I have family to feed." The foreman never mocked him again after that. In fact, he became one of my father's biggest advocates in that factory. He started helping my father with English, teaching him new words during breaks. By the time my father retired, they were friends. That story taught me something important. People aren't their circumstances. That foreman judged my father at first based on what he couldn't do, his English. But once he saw who my father was, his character, his work ethic, his dignity, everything changed. That's what I try to do in my courtroom every single day. I try to see beyond the surface. I try to see the person standing before me, not just the violation they committed. The afternoon session of court went smoothly. More parking tickets, a few noise complaints, a couple of cases involving failure to license pets, routine stuff. But I'll be honest, my mind kept drifting back to Mr. Menendez and his family. Around 3 o'clock, I wrapped up for the day. I went back to my chambers, took off my robe, and sat at my desk. I pulled out a legal pad and made a note. Follow up on Menendez case in 30 days. I wanted to check in, make sure he was making his payments, make sure he'd found a legal place to park, and I genuinely wanted that letter from Miguel. That evening, I went home and told Joyce about the case. We were sitting at our kitchen table, the same table we'd sat at for 40 years, and I recounted the whole story. Joyce listened the way she always does, with her full attention, nodding in the right places, her eyes showing emotion when I got to the part about Mr. Menendez's wife passing away. When I finished, Joyce reached across the table and put her hand on mine. She said, "You did the right thing, Frank. Your father would be proud." Coming from her, that meant everything. Joyce knew my father. She'd seen how hard he worked, how much he sacrificed. Her approval told me I'd made the right call. Before I tell you what happened next, let me ask you this. Do you think I made the right decision? Was I too lenient? Should I have held firm on the full fine? I'm genuinely curious what you think. Leave me a comment, because I read every single one. And if you believe in second chances like I do, hit that subscribe button and that like button right now. 3 weeks went by. I'd almost forgotten about the Menendez case, buried as I was in the constant flow of new cases every day. Then one morning, Christina came into my chambers with a manila envelope. She had a knowing smile on her face. She said, "Judge, this came for you." She handed me the envelope. There was no return address, but my name was written carefully on the front in neat handwriting. I opened it. Inside were 3 pieces of paper. The first was a money order for $25, the first monthly payment, right on time. That made me smile. Mr. Menendez was a man of his word. The second piece of paper was a handwritten letter in Spanish. I couldn't read it, but I could see it was from Mr. Menendez based on the signature at the bottom. The third piece of paper was what I'd asked for, a 2-page letter from Miguel. It was typed, single-spaced, with only a few minor spelling errors. I sat down at my desk and began to read. "Dear Judge Caprio," it started, "my name is Miguel Menendez. I'm 17 years old and a junior at Classical High School. My father asked me to write to you about my dreams and why I want to study engineering. I want to start by saying thank you. Thank you for giving my father a chance. Thank you for treating him with respect. You don't know how much that meant to our family." I could feel my throat tightening already, but I kept reading. I want to be an engineer because I want to build things that help people. When I was younger, back in Guatemala, my mother got very sick. The hospital there didn't have good equipment. The machines kept breaking down. I remember standing in that hospital and thinking, if someone had built better machines, maybe my mother would have better care. I had to pause. I took off my glasses and rubbed my eyes. This 17-year-old kid, had watched his mother die because of inadequate medical equipment, and instead of becoming bitter, instead of giving up, he decided he wanted to fix things so other people wouldn't have to go through what he went through. I kept reading. My father works so hard for me and my sister. Every morning he wakes up at 5 o'clock. He makes coffee and packs a lunch. Then he leaves in the dark to go wait for work. Sometimes he comes home with work and he's happy. Sometimes he comes home without work, and I can see he's worried, but he never complains. He never stops trying. When my sister told me what happened in court, when she told me what you said to my father, I cried. I cried because I realized that not everyone sees my father the way some people do. Some people look at him and just see a man who doesn't speak English well. They think he's not smart or not important. But you looked at him and saw who he really is. You saw a father. You saw a man with dignity. I had to stop reading for a minute. I stood up and walked to my window. I looked out at the city of Providence, at the buildings and the streets and the people going about their lives. I thought about how many Miguel Mendezes there were out there, kids with enormous potential, kids with dreams and drive, but who were invisible to most people because of their circumstances. I sat back down and finished the letter. I want to go to college at either MIT or Worcester Polytechnic Institute. I want to study biomedical engineering. I want to design medical equipment that works better and costs less so that hospitals everywhere, even in poor countries, can have good equipment. I want to make sure that no other kid has to watch their mother die because the machines don't work. My father always tells me that in America, if you work hard and never give up, you can achieve anything. He tells me that this country gave him a chance when he had nothing. He tells me that America is the greatest country in the world because it sees people for who they can become, not just where they came from. Judge Caprio, you proved my father right. You gave him a chance. You saw his potential to be a good father and a good person, even though he made mistakes with the parking. Because of you, he believes even more strongly in this country, and because of you, I'm more determined than ever to make him proud. Thank you for believing in my family. Thank you for showing mercy. I promise you that I will not waste this opportunity. I will study hard. I will get into a good college. And someday, when I'm an engineer designing equipment that saves lives, I'll remember that it was possible because a judge in Providence saw my father's humanity. The letter was signed, "With respect and gratitude, Miguel Menendez." I sat there at my desk with that letter in my hands, and I'm not ashamed to tell you that I cried. I'm a 70-year-old judge, and I sat in my chambers and cried like a baby. Christina came in to ask me something, saw me crying, and quietly closed the door to give me privacy. This is why I do this job. This is why I put on these robes every morning. It's not about the power or the authority. It's about moments like this. It's about making a decision that allows a kid like Miguel to keep dreaming, that allows a father like Mr. Menendez to keep believing in this country. I called Christina into my office. I showed her the letter. She read it, and by the time she finished, she was crying too. She said, "Judge, you need to frame this. You need to keep this forever." She was right. I had the letter framed, along with a small photo that had been included in the envelope. The photo showed Mr. Menendez, Maria, and Miguel standing together, smiling. Mr. Menendez had his arms around both his kids. They looked happy. They looked like a family that had been given a chance and wasn't going to waste it. I hung that frame in my office, right behind my desk where I could see it every day. And I meant what I told Maria in court. When I have a hard day, when I'm frustrated with the system, or tired, or wondering if anything I do matters, I look at that photo and read a few lines from Miguel's letter. It reminds me why I'm here. Look, I need to ask you for a favor. If this story is resonating with you, if you're getting something out of it, hit that subscribe button for me. It helps me share these lessons with more people who need to hear them. And drop a comment telling me about a time someone gave you or someone you know a second chance. I want to hear your stories. I also asked Christina to scan that Spanish letter from Mr. Menendez and find someone to translate it. One of our court translators did it for me the next day. The translation made me emotional all over again. Mr. Menendez had written, "Your Honor, I do not have the words in English or Spanish to express my gratitude. You treated me like a person, not like a problem. You spoke to me with respect, not judgment. In my life, I have met many people who looked at me and saw only a poor man who cannot speak English. But you looked at me and saw a father. You saw my children's future. You gave me hope when I had none." He went on to write about his journey to America, about leaving Guatemala to escape violence and poverty, about the dream of giving his children opportunities he never had. He wrote about his wife and how much he missed her. He wrote about the fear he carried every day, the fear of not being able to provide, the fear of failing his kids. Then he wrote something that I'll never forget. He said, "Your Honor, my father told me before I left Guatemala that America was a place where justice was real, where even a poor man could be treated fairly." I did not believe him completely. I thought he was being naive. But you proved him right. You showed me that justice in America is not just for the rich or the powerful. It is for everyone. You showed me that the American dream my father spoke of is real. He ended the letter by saying, "I will never forget your kindness. I will teach my children to be like you, to show mercy to others, to see people's hearts and not just their mistakes. God bless you and your family. You will be in my prayers every night." I must have read that translated letter a dozen times. Each time I thought about my father and his faith in America. I thought about how this country, for all its flaws and problems, still represents hope to people like Mr. Menendez, still represents the possibility of a better life. And I thought about my responsibility as a judge. Every decision I make doesn't just affect the person standing in front of me. It affects their family, their future, their faith in the system. That's a heavy responsibility, but it's one I'm honored to carry. The months went by, Every month, like clockwork, I received a money order for $25 from Mr. Menendez. Sometimes it came with a short note from Maria, updating me on the family. She told me that Miguel had been accepted into a summer engineering program at Brown University. She told me that her father had found more consistent work and was able to pay for parking now. She told me that she'd made the dean's list at CCRI. Each note filled my heart. This family was thriving. They were making it. And I'd played a small part in making that possible. 6 months after the court case, I received the final payment. The debt was paid in full, but along with that final money order was an invitation. It was handwritten and formal. Judge Caprio, you are cordially invited to Miguel Menendez's graduation from Classical High School. The ceremony will be held on June 10th at 2 p.m. Our family would be honored if you could attend. You have been such an important part of our journey, and we would love for you to celebrate this milestone with us. I checked my calendar. I had court that day, but the ceremony was in the afternoon. I could make it work. I told Christina to rearrange my afternoon docket. There was no way I was missing this. June 10th arrived. It was a beautiful sunny day. I finished my morning cases, changed out of my robes, and drove to Classical High School. The graduation was being held outside on the football field. There were hundreds of people there, families and friends, everyone dressed up, everyone excited. I found a seat near the back. I didn't want to make a big deal out of being there. This was Miguel's day, not mine. But as I was sitting down, I felt a tap on my shoulder. It was Maria. She looked so different from the scared young woman I'd met in court 6 months earlier. She was beaming, confident, happy. She said, "Judge Caprio, you came. Oh my gosh, my father's going to be so happy. Come with me. We saved you a seat with us." Before I could protest, she was leading me through the crowd to where her family was sitting. Mr. Menendez saw me coming and stood up immediately. His face broke into the biggest smile. He shook my hand with both of his, pumping it up and down, speaking rapidly in Spanish. Maria translated, "He says you have honored our family by coming. He says he'll never forget this." I sat with them during the ceremony. I watched as hundreds of names were called, as kids walked across the stage to receive their diplomas. Some of the students were rowdy, dancing or doing flips. Some were emotional, crying as they accepted their diplomas. Each one represented a journey, a family sacrifice, a future beginning. Then I heard the name, Miguel Alberto Menendez. I watched as Miguel walked up onto that stage. He was wearing his cap and gown, but underneath I could see a dress shirt and tie. He walked with his head high, with confidence, with purpose. As he accepted his diploma, the principal said something into the microphone. "Miguel Menendez is graduating with a 3.9 GPA. He's been accepted to Worcester Polytechnic Institute, where he'll be studying biomedical engineering on a full academic scholarship. Congratulations, Miguel." The crowd applauded, but our section erupted. Mr. Menendez was on his feet, cheering louder than anyone. Tears were streaming down his face. Maria was jumping up and down, screaming her brother's name. And I'll admit it, I was clapping so hard my hands hurt, with tears in my own eyes. This kid, this son of an immigrant day laborer. This kid who'd watched his mother die in a poorly equipped hospital. This kid was going to one of the best engineering schools in the country on a full scholarship. He was going to achieve his dream. He was going to make a difference in the world. After the ceremony, there was a reception. Families were taking photos, hugging, celebrating. Mr. Menendez found me in the crowd. With Maria translating, he said, "Your Honor, we're having a small party at our apartment for Miguel. Just family and close friends. We would be honored if you would come. Please." I almost said no. I didn't want to intrude on their family celebration, but something in Mr. Menendez's eyes, the genuine warmth and invitation, made me say yes. I followed them to their apartment. It was in an older building, probably built in the 1950s, in a neighborhood that had seen better days. But when I walked inside, the apartment was immaculate, small but spotlessly clean. The furniture was old but well maintained. There were religious pictures on the walls, photos of family, a shelf full of Miguel's academic awards and Maria's certificates. The apartment was full of people, extended family, neighbors, friends from church. Everyone was speaking Spanish, the conversation loud and animated. Someone had made massive amounts of food, traditional Guatemalan dishes that filled the apartment with incredible smells. When I walked in, the room got quiet for a moment. Then Mr. Menendez announced something in Spanish, and everyone started clapping. Maria told me, "My father just told everyone that you're the judge who helped our family. They're thanking you." I felt embarrassed by the attention. I kept saying, No, this is Miguel's day. This is about him." But they insisted on treating me like an honored guest. Someone brought me a plate piled high with food. Someone else brought me a drink. People came up to shake my hand and thank me in broken English. Miguel found me standing somewhat awkwardly near the window. He walked up with that same confidence I'd seen on the stage and extended his hand. "Judge Caprio, thank you for coming. This means so much to me and my family." I shook his hand and said, "Miguel, I'm so proud of you. Full scholarship to WPI? That's incredible. You should be very proud of yourself." He smiled and said, "I couldn't have done it without my father, and honestly without you too." I started to protest, but he cut me off. "No, really. When my father came home from court that day and told us what happened, it changed something for all of us. We'd been living in fear for so long. Fear that we didn't belong here, that we'd never really be accepted, that one mistake would ruin everything. But you showed us that this country is what our father always said it was. A place where people get second chances. A place where character matters more than circumstances." This 17-year-old kid was speaking with the wisdom of someone much older. I said, "Miguel, you're going to do great things. I can see it. And when you design that medical equipment you told me about in your letter, when you're saving lives with your inventions, I want you to remember something. Your father saved your life first. He saved your future by having the courage to come to this country, to work hard jobs, to stand in that courtroom even though he was scared. That's the real heroism here." Miguel's eyes got misty. He nodded. "I know. I tell him that all the time. He doesn't think he's special, but he's my hero. You know what keeps me doing this job after 40 years? Moments like these. Seeing that the law really does apply to everyone equally, that mercy and justice can coexist, that one decision can ripple out and change lives. If this story is restoring your faith in justice, show me by hitting that subscribe button and that like button. Share this with someone who needs to see it." I stayed at that party for 2 hours. I ate too much food. I laughed with people I couldn't fully communicate with, but who welcomed me like family. I watched Mr. Menendez move through the room, his arm around Miguel's shoulders, introducing his son to everyone with unmistakable pride. At one point, Mr. Menendez gathered everyone together. He made a speech in Spanish. I couldn't understand the words, but I understood the emotion. He was crying as he spoke. He kept gesturing toward Miguel, toward Maria, toward me. When he finished, everyone raised their glasses. Maria came over and translated for me. "My father said that today proves that God is good, that America is a land of opportunity, and that kindness is never forgotten. He said that 6 months ago he thought his mistakes would destroy our family, but instead, because of you, his mistakes became a lesson in mercy. He said he'll spend the rest of his life trying to be worthy of the second chance he was given." I had to excuse myself for a moment. I went to the bathroom and composed myself. I looked at myself in the mirror and thought about my father. I thought about all the people who'd shown him kindness over the years, all the people who'd given him chances when they didn't have to. I thought about how those small acts of kindness had rippled forward, how they'd made it possible for me to become a judge, how they'd put me in a position to help families like the Menendez. I thought about the interconnectedness of it all, how my father's struggles had taught me compassion, how that compassion had led me to show mercy to Mr. Menendez, how that mercy had allowed Miguel to keep dreaming, how Miguel's dreams would someday save lives, one act of kindness rippling forward through generations. When I came back out, Mr. Menendez was waiting for me. He handed me a small gift, wrapped in simple paper. Through Maria, he said, "Please open it." I unwrapped it carefully. Inside was a framed photo. It was the same photo I had in my office, the one of Mr. Menendez with his arms around Miguel and Maria. But this copy was signed by all three of them. Miguel had written, "To Judge Caprio, the man who believed in our family, thank you for giving my father a second chance. I promise to make you proud. With gratitude, Miguel Menendez." Mr. Menendez had signed it in Spanish, and Maria had written in English, "You restored our faith in justice. You showed us that America really is the land of opportunity. Thank you for seeing our humanity, the Menendez family." I'll be honest with you, I lost it. Right there in that crowded apartment, I broke down crying. Mr. Menendez hugged me. This man who I'd met as a defendant in my courtroom 6 months earlier was hugging me like I was family, and Maria and Miguel joined in, and we stood there in this group hug, 4 people from different backgrounds, different languages, different circumstances, connected by a moment of mercy. I left that party feeling more fulfilled than I'd felt in years. I drove home thinking about the day, about the graduation, about the joy in that small apartment. When I got home, Joyce took one look at me and knew something profound had happened. I showed her the photo. I told her about the party. I told her about Miguel's scholarship. She held my hand and said, "Frank, this is your legacy. Not the cases you've heard or the fines you've collected. These families whose lives you've touched. These people who believe in the system because of you." She was right. This was what mattered. Later that week, I received an email. It was from the principal of Classical High School. He'd heard about my attendance at Miguel's graduation and wanted to thank me, but that wasn't all. He wrote, "Judge Caprio, I wanted you to know that Miguel gave a speech to the junior class last month. He told them about his father's experience in your courtroom. He told them about the letter you asked him to write. He told them that one judge's kindness changed his family's life. 15 students came to me after that speech and said they were inspired to work harder, to believe more strongly in their futures. Your impact goes far beyond your courtroom, sir." I printed that email and put it in my desk drawer. On hard days, I pull it out and read it, because being a judge isn't easy. You see people at their worst. You hear stories that break your heart. You make decisions that you second guess. But then you have a case like the Mendez's, and you remember why it matters. I kept in touch with the family over the following years. Miguel sent me updates from college. After his first year, he wrote to tell me he'd made the dean's list and had been selected for a research project designing low-cost ventilators for rural hospitals. After his second year, he told me about an internship he'd gotten at Boston Medical Center, working on their medical equipment. Each update filled me with pride. Maria graduated from CCRI and transferred to URI to finish her pharmacy degree. She sent me an invitation to her white coat ceremony when she was accepted into pharmacy school. I couldn't attend, but I sent her a card with a note that said, "Your father's courage gave you this opportunity. Your hard work earned it. Congratulations on achieving your dream." Mr. Menendez continued to work construction, but eventually he got hired by a specific company as a regular employee rather than working as a day laborer. Maria told me he had benefits now, health insurance and paid time off. She said it was the first time in his life he'd had job security like that. 3 years after Miguel's high school graduation, I received another letter from him. He was in his senior year at WPI. He wrote, "Judge Caprio, I wanted to let you know that I've been accepted into a master's program in biomedical engineering at MIT. I'll be working on a project designing affordable diagnostic equipment for developing countries. My dream is getting closer to reality. None of this would have been possible without you believing in my family. Thank you for showing my father mercy when he needed it most." When I read that letter, I thought back to that Tuesday morning 3 years earlier. I thought about Mr. Menendez standing in my courtroom, scared and ashamed, worried about $800 in parking fines. If I had thrown the book at him, if I had shown no mercy, who knows what would have happened. Maybe he would have found a way to pay. Maybe he would have fallen behind on rent. Maybe the stress would have affected his kids' schooling. Maybe Miguel's dreams would have been deferred or destroyed, but instead, I made a choice. I chose to see beyond the violation to the man. I chose to believe in second chances, and look at what happened. An entire family's trajectory changed. A young man was on his way to becoming an engineer who would save lives. A young woman was becoming a pharmacist who would help her community. A father had renewed faith in the country he'd sacrificed everything to reach. So let me ask you this. Do you think I was too harsh on Mr. Menendez, or not harsh enough? I'm genuinely curious what you think. And here's another question for you. If you were in my position, what would you have done? Would you have shown mercy or delivered strict justice? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. I actually read them, every single one. If this story meant something to you, if you believe in equal justice like I do me a favor. Hit that like button and subscribe to this channel. Turn on that bell icon so you never miss another story from my courtroom. Share this video with someone who needs to hear this message. Someone who believes that character matters more than cash. Someone who thinks everyone deserves to be treated with dignity, regardless of their circumstances. And check out the next video on your screen. I've got another incredible story from my courtroom that you won't believe. I'll see you tomorrow with another lesson about justice, respect, and what really matters in this life. I'm Frank Caprio. I've been on this bench for 40 years because I believe something simple. We're all equal before the law, every single one of us. Rich or poor, powerful or powerless, whether you speak perfect English or you need a translator, whether you were born here or you came here seeking a better life. The law should treat you fairly. It should see your humanity. It should balance justice with mercy. That's what makes this country work. That's what makes this the greatest country on earth. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for caring about families like the Mendezes. Thank you for believing that one person showing kindness can change the course of someone's life. God bless you, and remember, respect costs nothing, but it's worth everything.